Hey, folks, it is December the 9th, and today we're going over chapters 93 and 94, so please make sure you read over that. Now, we're not going to take notes over this chapter, but just as a reminder, um, I want you to make sure that you go into Google Classroom. We have the link on quiz materials. Make sure you study those sets regarding what's going to be on your vocabulary quiz for tomorrow. I'm going to post that in Google Classroom. You're going to go in through Google Forms, of course, take your quiz. And I'm also going to post some readings for you as well, which will have a separate attachment that'll be due at a later date. That's pretty much it. No notes today, so I'm not going to take a picture and post the board for you today, but please pay attention. All right, so like we were talking about last time, we were talking about how northern Italy was really this place where you had a whole lot of wealth in the hands of personal individuals, a growth of the guild system and industry. And because of that, you had a sense of liberty that wasn't known throughout much of Europe at this time. People in many of these cities got to have their own local governments. They had to say so in it. And they got to have a higher rate of literacy. They enjoyed better food. They had a sense of the arts and things like that, right? So it was pretty good for their lives. Well, we see throughout much of Germany, and of course, also in the Netherlands, you're going to see something similar. You're going to have city-states that are based on trade and industry and individual freedom, and they protect their cities. And so much like the Italian city-states, it's free citizens who volunteer not just for government positions, but also for common defense, for their militia. So you have kind of like the ancient Greeks. You'd have people work in their own personal jobs, but they would also train together to be their own military, to defend themselves from invaders. And so the Hanseatic League was essentially revolving around northern German cities, but you see they also spread all the way up towards Russia here. They were responsible for a lot of trade with England, also these other Scandinavian countries up here, and of course modern day Poland, and so on and so forth. As your book states, they were a maritime power, they had some industry, and they would open up something called factories. But factories to them weren't like the way we think of it today. Factories to these folks were essentially trading posts. And so they would open up trading post factories in England, which were kind of like a small walled city where the local lord would give them some autonomy and allow them to trade. This practice of opening up these trading posts is also going to be mimicked by, think about the Portuguese later. When they start exploring around Africa, they're going to open up their own trade outpost along the African coast. And of course, there, sadly enough, is where much of the slave trade is going to be going on that will eventually bring slavery to the Americas. Well, I mean, in the Africanized slavery. Of course, many Native American societies did have slavery in the Americas as well. It's one of those sad realities of all the world. All right, so Flanders. Flanders doesn't exist as a country anymore, but it essentially was a collection of city-states, as we see here, Bruges, Ghent, Brussels, Antwerp, and Hasselt. And so they would often band together for a common defense, either against the Holy Roman Empire or against the French kings. But they also spent a lot of time fighting one another too. They were a confederacy, which means they were supposed to join one another within common defense, but not rule over each other. However, they often faced civil wars with one another. That's one of the problems with city-states. The ancient Greeks had this problem as well when they had city-states. Sometimes when there was foreign invaders, they would defend one another. But when they weren't, they spent some of their times fighting one another. And eventually this left them weakened enough to where they'd be overwhelmed by France and absorbed by it. They made a great deal of their money off of English wool. The English had a lot of fields and pastures that were very good for raising sheep. And the sheep there, due to the climate, grew very good wool, which was the major source of clothing throughout much of Europe. They didn't have cotton was too hard to work with, and it needed warmer climates. Silk, of course, was super expensive, and they didn't have synthetic materials like we have today. And the same with like linen. Linen comes from flax flowers, which enjoys warmer climates. Later on, we're going to see that England is going to take the wool trade in its own and start its own weaving. But of course, in the Flanders and places like that, you had guilds of guys who would, of course, clean the wool up and spin it into cloth, into threads, weave tapestries out of it. They made a great deal of money from this due to their skill and their ability to trade throughout much of Europe. And so this helped build up a rich class and a skilled middle class. And it also gave a lot of work in helping out with these industries to the poorer classes as well, and helped breed a lot of independence. They didn't have to live off of growing wheat out of the land. Growing sheep do not seem to have the same problems regarding bad weather and things like that. They're a little more sturdy. And so, and let's face it, the world needs to be clothed, especially in Europe where it can get very cold. So they're often at war with France. You remember the French loved their knighted class in warfare. However, the highly skilled people of Flanders were able to join together and train. And as footmen, men would often arm themselves of their own coin and armor themselves as well. And due to their good ability and craftsmanship, were able to make very good weapons and armor and able to fight off these larger French armies time and time again. Their cities were very well walled and defended, and it turned out to be a pretty big hassle. Now, the French monarchy definitely wanted to own this region because they were just so rich. The same reason the Holy Roman emperors are going to invade Italy over and over. Italy was so rich, and the kings were not. But the kings did have large armies. And so it's pretty dangerous to be a small fish and have a lot of wealth and be surrounded by violent people who want your money. Yeah. And that pretty much sums that up. These areas are going to, because of their wealth and literacy rates and industry, are going to take on very well to the printing press. And you're going to see an explosion in political ideas and, of course, religious ideas as well. Of course, that's going to come during and after the Renaissance. And so it's short today, but that's going to wrap up our lecture. Please make sure that you go into Google Classroom and study your terms for tomorrow's quiz. Bye. But yeah, when we come back next week,